I think step one in general for me is, getting Python on your machine. So let's get started, right? I don't think this machine has it, but let's check. This is pretty much a new machine, but let's check. So I do have Python. I actually have 3.10. I didn't know that I actually downloaded that. So we're already set up, but just in case you didn't have Python, what you'd want to do is go to Python, type Python3 in Google. Of course, you probably want to spell it correctly. And then you can go to python.org/downloads, and you'll see a bunch of versions of Python. The latest one being 3.10. By the way, there's a lot of stuff out there with Python 2 still. If you don't know, Python 2 was end of life, EOL'd quite a long time ago. So I would definitely not, and you'll see it right here. Let me zoom in. So Python 2.7 was end of life in 2010, 01, so almost 2 years ago now, or actually a little over 2 years ago. So definitely don't use it. If you're interested in learning Python, I strongly recommend not starting with Python 2. There is some really big changes between Python 2 and Python 3, and there's just really no reason to learn Python 2. Don't do it. Unless you have to maintain like some really old super code that was written in Python 2 for some reason, and you can't uplift it to Python 3 for another really weird reason, like you're using underlying C bindings, and for some reason you can't write new ones in Python 3 or something super weird. Don't learn Python 2. Definitely anything greenfield or new is always going to be in Python 3. So just something to think about. So we already have Python 3. If you don't have it, you'll download it. So there's something really interesting in Windows, and I don't usually work in Windows all day. I'm usually a Linux or a Unix guy, so either Mac OS or some Linux distribution. But something that I noticed that a lot of first-time developers do is when they download Python for some reason, they just click next, 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 next. And there's a lot of really important things. One is setting up your Windows environment settings. Please, this will give you a big headache. You'll say, I downloaded Python, but I opened up my command line and I type Python and nothing, or I type pip and nothing. If you do click through, there is a setting that I'll show it to you. When you're going through the install, it's going to ask you a whole bunch of optional features. You're going to get to the page that says advanced options, and one of them is going to say add Python to environment variables. Please check this box. If you don't, you're going to give yourself a really big headache. It's not worth it. If you forget to, by the way, all you have to do is run the installer again, go through this advanced options, click add to Python environment, add Python to environment variables, and hit install. This will go ahead and set your environment variables for you, so you don't have to worry about getting that pip or Python not found. So the other thing is we're going to be using today VSCode. There's a lot of IDEs or text editors, IDEs, integrated development environments or developer environments. There's a lot of them. There's not a best one. There's not the right one. Whoever tries to convince you like, oh, you should be using, Vim, or you should be using, IntelliJ, JetBrains, PyCharm, or, VSCode or whatever, or Sublime or Atom. Don't listen to them. Use what you want. Obviously, if you're on a team, if you're in a team setting, the only caveat to that is if you're in a team and your team is very opinionated on their IDE, and you're a new engineer and they do a lot of paired programming, I'll speak for myself. Like if I'm helping a new engineer and they're using an IDE I never even used before, there is a barrier to entry there. So just think if you're a new engineer and your whole team's using like VS Code or Atom or Sublime or Vim, maybe not Vim. Hopefully you don't join a team and you have to learn Vim at the same time. But if they're using an IDE, try to at least use something very similar. That way your team can support you when you're asking for help and your pair programming. It's all the same, your team can jump in and help you out. Sweet. So today we're going to be setting up VS Code real quick. We're going to learn some basic Python stuff. So we'll do a whole bunch of like string manipulation. We'll do things like learning some of the primitive types. We'll do some list stuff, some data structure, some basic data structure stuff, some iteration stuff. So loops, while loops, things like that, different types of loops. We'll talk about more complex data structures and talking about what those look like in Python. at a very, very high level. And then we'll make maybe a little text-based game, you know, something not too crazy. And we'll make different versions of this text-based game. And I think it's a good way to show kind of like the different levels as you go throughout your career, like what a beginner engineer might do if you ask them to write me a, you know, text-based game, you know, what an intermediate engineer would write, and maybe more advanced. And then we won't go too crazy down that evolution, but we'll go through a different amount of those levels. Let's start. So this was our Python bot, but we're not going to be doing that today. We will take that up another day. Today we're gonna let that one ride. So we're gonna create a new directory and call this Python. We'll change into that. So we got our Python. We created a little Python directory. We changed into it, and we're gonna create like our first base folder here. And we're just gonna call this setup, or we'll call this strings. We'll make another directory called strings. And we'll change it to that. By the way, I encourage you to follow me along if you're new to programming or you're new to Python. Follow me along. This should be simple enough. I'll go slow enough that you should be able to keep up. So download VS Code. To do that, all we're gonna do is we're gonna go into bring up our nice handy dandy Google. Type in VS Code. Of course, type better than me today. And just follow the links. Download for Windows. If you're on Mac or Linux, that will reflect the right build. If it doesn't, click on the little drop down and make sure you install the right installer. But you know, we already have Windows up and running. Download that, install that, and run it. And what you should get is going to be pretty close to, I would say, this. This is probably what you'll come up with, is a screen just like this. Let me just take this off. And you'll just have a blank little screen. What you can do is you can hit Control tilde, or you can just go to View Command Palette, or View, Terminal. This will pop up the terminal on the bottom. You can even just create a directory on in your Windows system, so you can just bring up your old Windows File Explorer. And I would put it somewhere in your documents. Maybe create a folder called Code. Create a new folder in here. You know, call it like Learning Python or Python. You know, create some subdirectories in there. We got our strings in here, which is fine because we're gonna do strings first. And once you got that all set up, what we're gonna do is we're gonna open that directory. So we'll just do File Open. We'll go find our documents code, find our Python, find our strings, and we'll open that directory. And we'll select the strings folder. We're going to hit Control tilde again, get our little PowerShell terminal up here. This should be the default one if you're on Windows. If you're on Mac or Linux, it should be Bash or ZSH, whatever your default shell is. And what we want to do first is we want to make sure Python's set up correctly. So we'll do Python version. And what we should get back here is we should get back the version of Python we're using. So like I said, I already have 3.10.2 installed. Hopefully, you know, you could have downloaded a newer version. If not, if you might be on Python 3.11 when you see this, or 3.12, or 3.10.3. Don't really worry about that. To be honest, as long as you're on Python 3, everything we do should be good. You know, you shouldn't have any problems. We're not going to do anything too crazy. That's going to be subversion specific. Everything we should be doing, as long as you're on Python 3, should work for you 100%. So cool, we're in our strings folder. And the first thing I want to do is create a file. So I'm going to call that main.py. Now there's a couple of different things, you know, as soon as you create a main py file. Now I already have an extension called material icons installed. We did that last stream. That's why I have this little Python symbol here. You can look at extensions in VS Code by clicking extensions. And then you can actually type in like icons. There's quite a few of them. The one that I'm using, and we'll sort by my installed. And we'll search for icons again. The one that I'm using is called Material Icon Theme. I really like this one. I'm just particular to it. You don't have to use an icon theme, but if you're not, you probably won't see that Python symbol there. Now, as soon as I create my main py file, VS Code's pretty good. It's a really good IDE. I prefer it because I feel like it tries to help the user out a lot. The one thing I like about it is it doesn't abstract too much about you writing your code and learning your language, where you don't understand what to do really. And I'm not saying all IDEs do this, but I have used some IntelliJ products in the past. I'm not saying IntelliJ is bad, but when I have used and consumed those products, I've noticed that it abstracted a lot of things from me, which is actually not a bad thing. But I like to be, I really like to understand what's going on. I don't really like magic. It's kind of my motto. I'm not a big magic person, especially in software engineering. I want to kind of understand those lower level things, what's going on, how do I do it? And the reason for that is when you start talking about pushing code into production and supporting systems, understanding really on a really basic fundamental what's going on really does help you. So I would just recommend doing that. So VSCode is going to say, hey, do you want to install the recommended state extensions for Python? Just click install. It has a really good one called Pylance. It's called Python. This is backed by something called Pylance. It works really well. It comes with our linters, our debuggers, our code formatters. You know, it's really good. Just install that, let VS Code do its thing, and then we should be good to go.